Thank you very much, Nancy. The United States Institute of Peace, I want to thank you for inviting me here and listening to my views about Pakistan, Pakistan's policy. And I start with how someone like me, a sportsman for 20 years, international sportsman who ended up in politics. I'm the first generation Pakistani. My parents were born in colonial India. I was the first generation who grew up in an independent Pakistan. We grew up with a lot of pride. My parents reminded me always how awful it was to live in a colonial, in a country where you didn't have your freedom. So I valued the freedom of being in an independent country. And we took great pride when Pakistan started growing rapidly in the 60s. It's not used to my voice, I think it's too heavy. In the 60s, Pakistan was the fastest growing country in the whole region. Pakistan was a country which gave us hope. We grew up feeling that this is a country with a destiny. And then things started going wrong from 70s onwards. And I was playing cricket for 2 decades, international sportsman. I finished in the early 90s. And my initial thought after playing sport was to go into social work. I had already started building a cancer hospital. My mother had died of cancer. And I realized that there was no cancer hospital in Pakistan, so I thought I would build one, specifically because poor people cannot afford cancer treatment. So I spent 6-7 years of my life after cricket building and then running the hospital. But it was during that time I realized that this is a big country. Social work was not going to change it. The only way we would change our country is joining politics. Change only comes through when you head a government and bring about a change. And the reason why I joined politics was because I realized our politics was going in a direction which was leading Pakistan to nowhere. Problem with most ex-colonial countries was exactly what Pakistan was facing. If you look at Africa, you look at the independence movements in Africa, and then the leaders who came from the independence movement, once they assumed government, a similar pattern took place. The moment they got power, they used power for benefiting themselves. Corruption was the main reason why countries could not reach their potential. And Pakistan was exactly that country which in 60s, while was taking off, from mid-80s onwards, it started going down because of corruption of the ruling elite. So when I formed my party in 1996, it was on an anti-corruption platform. And I campaigned for 15 years in the political wilderness, talking about corruption, and could not make people understand the relevance, the relation between corruption and poverty. People could not relate the two. Somehow in ex-colonial countries, people thought taking money from the government was nothing wrong with it, because it was not your government. It was a foreign government which was ruling over you. So if you evaded taxes, there was, you were not doing anything wrong. And similarly, corruption. So I formed my party, as I said, in 1996. For 15 years, I had only a few people with me, and no one thought I had a chance. But then suddenly, people began to understand what I was saying. So the party then began to take off about 7 years ago. And in 2013, we formed government in one of the 4 provinces. And because of our performance in that one in that one province in 2018, we won the elections. So what has been the main challenge since we've come to power 10 months ago? Number one challenge was inheriting a country which was bankrupt. We had the biggest current account and fiscal deficits. But worse, what corruption does is it's not just a question of bankrupting a country and money being laundered out of the country. What happens is the ruling elites, when they make money, money out of corruption, they then have to take it out of the country because otherwise people would ask them questions, where did the money come from? So you suffer in 2 ways. Number one, the money which should go to human development ends up going into people's pockets. But secondly, that money leaves the country. And in my opinion, which I spoke to President Trump yesterday, the biggest problem that the world faces is about $1 trillion leaving developing and poor countries and either going into offshore accounts or they end up in Western countries. And this is impoverishing, this is causing more deaths than through terrorism than through drugs. The amount of people dying of hunger and disease, lack of education, not having clean drinking water, is because of the ruling elites and developing world taking that money out and parking it into, as I said, offshore accounts or Western countries. So we faced a similar situation. We had the biggest current account deficit and fiscal deficit. But the other aspect of corruption is that in order for the ruling elites to take money out, they have to destroy the state institutions. Because if the institutions are strong, they would not be able to take the money out. For instance, if your anti-corruption body is strong, if your justice system is working, is robust, if your taxation department, like equivalent to the Indian revenue here or the IRS here, if these institutions are strong, you cannot take money out of the country. But that's the biggest damage these corrupt ruling elites do to developing world. They destroy these institutions. So, you can recover the money, but what you can't, to build institutions takes time. So the biggest challenge we have faced since we've been in power is trying to build the state institutions. And, we have succeeded, we have turned around various institutions, but it is a slow process. The relationship which we've had with our neighbors, the other priority we have tried to instill in Pakistan amongst the people is that we must have good relationship with all our neighbors. Because Pakistan at the moment, most of all, needs stability. We need stability for economic progress. We need peace. And so for peace, we need to have a good relationship with our neighbors. So first was me trying to reach out to India. India is, a country which we've had turbulent relationship with. But unfortunately, because of one issue of Kashmir, whenever we have tried, whenever relationship has started to move in the right direction with India, some incident happens, and that's all related to Kashmir, we go back to square one. And so I reached out to my counterpart in India, the Indian Prime Minister, assured him that, you come one step towards us, we will go 2 steps towards you, because the biggest problem India and Pakistan face is poverty. And the best way we can reduce poverty is if we start trading with each other. The next was Afghanistan. We again have had a difficult relationship with Afghanistan. And so we have reached out. I have invited President Ghani to Pakistan. And, it's a sort of long story, but we are moving towards, fortunately, we're all moving towards the same direction. There's a convergence now in Pakistan, in the US, that there is no military solution in Afghanistan. So we're all working towards the peace process. Similarly with Iran, we've had sort of a decent relationship with Iran without, it's not really a warm relationship, but a decent relationship with them. So we reached out to all our neighbors. And the next is the US. US is a superpower. You have to have good relationship with the US, whether you like it or not. So I was a bit worried when I was invited to meet President Trump. I've been in limelight, public life for 40 years. And sort of when I've gone to meet people who are famous or well-known or in power, you normally get advice that, what you should do, what questions you should ask when you meet them. But never in my life have I had so many suggestions before I was going to meet President Trump. Inundated. And I have to say that it was one of the most pleasant surprise, not just for me, for my delegation. The way, the hospitality, the way he, straightforward, charming way he treated us, so we were all blown over. We loved the meeting with the president yesterday. But above all, we decided on how we will now have a close relationship between Pakistan and the US. How we will now ensure that there is no communication gap. The period from 2003 or 4 to 2015 was the worst in the relationship between Pakistan and the US. Pakistanis felt that they were fighting the US war. No Pakistani was involved in 9/11. Taliban were in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda was in Afghanistan, but Pakistan ended up involved in that war, and we lost 70,000 people. We lost over $100 billion lost to our economy. And yet, there was mistrust. Pakistan felt it was doing its best. It could have stayed out of the war, and yet, Pakistan participated in the war, and Pakistan took a battering. There was a point when people like us thought, are we going to survive? Because there were suicide bombs going on every day. There were no sports team used to visit Pakistan, forget about investors. And so we passed through a terrible period, but at the same time, the US thought we weren't doing enough. We were playing a double game. So that was, in my opinion, the worst. It was the worst phase between the relationship between US and Pakistan. I was one of those, and I came here, I think in 2009, and I tried to explain to people here that there was no military solution in Afghanistan. I met, then Democrats hadn't come into power, the elections hadn't happened just before President Obama won the elections. I tried to explain I had a meeting organized, there's Dr. Ikram here, he organized a meeting with Joe Biden, John Kerry, Harry Reid, towering figures of the Democratic Party. And I sat there and tried to explain to them the history of Afghanistan, of Pakistan's tribal area, and tried to explain to them that there will be no military solution. But I realized they had no idea. People in the US had no idea about the history of Afghanistan and the sort of conflict they had got involved in. And fortunately, this time, everyone knows, people understand. So why do I think that we will now have the very best of relationship with the US? Because we are all on the same page. Previously, Pakistan army was supposedly fighting for the US, this war on terror. but the US did not think we were doing enough. And in Pakistan, we thought we had gone out of our way. This time, the Pakistan state, our security forces, the United States, all of us are on the same page. That peace in Afghanistan can only take place through a political settlement, through dialogue. So we are all now working on getting the Taliban to talk to the Afghan government. They're already talking to the US. And we hope that this will eventually lead to a settlement. Not easy. It's not going to be easy because there's no centralized Taliban command. It's a devolved movement. But we feel that if we all work together, we feel this is the best chance of there to be peace in Afghanistan. Apart from that, domestically, just one final word before I take your questions. I've struggled these 23 years to get into power. Most of these, as I said, in wilderness, political wilderness. I was not fighting political parties. I felt I was fighting a mafia. And the Supreme Court of Pakistan, actually, when there was this famous court case where the Prime Minister was dismissed, actually called the ruling party a Sicilian mafia. And I say a mafia because this is not normal politics. Because the two ruling families had been in power off and on for 30 years. And when you're in power for 30 years, their penetration was right down in the bureaucracy, in the judiciary, in the election commission. They had enormous amounts of money. And so we won because we mobilized the people. We mobilized the youth of Pakistan. We were very fortunate that Pakistan has 60% of Pakistanis are below the age of 30. They became our big support. The young people rallied around us. And it was the biggest public movement in Pakistan in the last 50 years. And so we won despite coming up against big money, despite the penetration in media, the most vilification campaign, personal attacks, and despite that, we won because of social media. This is the new. Had there been no social media, probably we would not have been able to beat the established parties. And since we have been in power, we are still up against the mafia. The problem has been to fix the economy. But at the same time, we have had the entire opposition trying to destabilize the country. So twice they have tried to create this uncertainty that there's been a run on the rupee. We almost had a run on the rupee because of them predicting that all fake news that IMF had told us that the rupee would go to a certain number. All wrong, but putting pressure on the economy all the time. Finally, I can say right now, after 10 months, we have finally stabilized the economy. And we feel now that after stabilizing the economy, we feel that we can now move ahead and start our reforms. Our reforms are very straightforward. We believe that real development is human development. So we are going to, all our money, we have decided that all the money which we retrieve from the criminal mafia, we've started a massive accountability campaign. We will then direct it towards human development. We've started one of the biggest poverty alleviation program in Pakistan's history, despite having financial constraints. But we believe that a country cannot rise if there's a small lot of rich people and a mass of poor ones. This is what's happened in Pakistan. The gap between the rich and the poor has grown with each year. And the whole system just caters for a tiny elite. The education system caters for just a tiny elite. To give you an example, we have a total of students coming from what are the elite schools, English medium schools, are 800,000. The children who go to government schools, they are about 33 million. And then children who go to Dini madrasas is 2.5 million. So we have three-tiered system. So the first thing our government is trying to do is to synthesize the syllabus, bring in science subjects, other subjects into Dini madrasas, which are the religious schools. So bring them into the mainstream. Similarly, in the Urdu medium schools, teach them English so that we equip them for higher education. So we're trying to bring the education system, which is the biggest problem our country faces, and the most difficult problem. So that's number one. Secondly is the Pakistan taxation system. We have the lowest tax GDP ratio in the world. We have, out of a population of 210 million people, we have only taxpayer, barely people, 1.5 million people pay taxes. So there's no way you can sustain a country if you do not expand the tax base. So we now are in the process, very difficult process, convincing everyone to come into the tax net. There are a lot of strikes going on right now, but we feel that we will be able to overcome them. Because it's imperative now that the Pakistani people pay taxes. The challenge, of course, has been that this mafia, I call this mafia, in 10 years, just so that you understand what they have done to our country. Because later on, people, you might ask me, why is this political victimization? What I call accountability, people will say political victimization. But I'll just tell you what they've done to our country in 10 years. The total debt of Pakistan in 2008, before these two parties came in, when General Musharraf left, the total debt of Pakistan in 60 years was 6 trillion rupees. In the last 10 years, they've taken it from 6 trillion to 30 trillion rupees. So where has this money gone? I've set up a commission, a debt commission, which is now going to find out where this money disappeared. So which is why we are going through this problem of finding out what happened to our country. How come we got so indebted? So the problem with having such a huge debt is that in the last year, the total tax revenue which we collected, half of it went to servicing debts. So you can't have 210 million people just surviving on this already a very low tax base and then half of it going into debt servicing. So for that, we are expanding our tax base. But what we are doing now in Pakistan is the first time in 1960s any government is going to take this step. We are now moving towards encouraging industrialization. In 1960s, Pakistan's industrial production was equal to 4 Asian tigers' industrial production: Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand. The combined industrial production was equal to Pakistan's in 1960s. After that, unfortunately, we deindustrialized. Our exports actually went down because our policies just did not encourage industrialization. So we now have embarked on a program of industrializing our country. We are giving incentives to industry. So we have, the main programs in Pakistan are, number one, poverty alleviation. We have allocated the biggest amount to alleviate poverty. Any money retrieved from these big crooks will go straight into the poverty alleviation program. Secondly, industrialization. We are now encouraging our industry, specifically export industry. We have trade agreements, one with China where we hope that we will be able to, free trade agreement with, a preferential trade agreement with China where we hope to export our stuff to China. China has imports of $2 trillion. So industrialization. And third is agriculture. Pakistan is basically an agricultural country, and we are hoping to get technology transfer from Europe, from China. Hopefully, we've spoke to companies in the United States so that we can improve our yields. Pakistan has the lowest yields, one of the most productive lands, but the lowest yields. So what we hope is that this three-pronged attack, we will be able to raise Pakistan's economy, provide employment to our people, improve productivity. So this is basically where we are headed. Thank you.